In this lesson we separate two systems that get confused constantly: Azure Role-Based Access Control, which governs who can manage Azure Virtual Desktop resources, and Microsoft Intra Conditional Access, which governs who is even allowed to authenticate. We'll walk the built-in desktop virtualization roles, the special data plane role that actually grants app access, the conditional access apps that target AVD, and the one app you should never put behind multi-factor authentication. Every access problem in Azure Virtual Desktop reduces to two separate questions. Role-based access control asks whether an admin can manage a resource. Conditional access asks whether a user is allowed to authenticate at all, right now, under the conditions Microsoft Entra ID observes. These are independent systems. Locking one down tightly while leaving the other open is the most common access control mistake teams make. Azure Virtual Desktop ships a deliberately granular set of built-in roles. Desktop Virtualization Contributor manages nearly everything but never grants user or group assignment on its own. Host pool, application group, and workspace contributor roles split that management even further by resource type. For daily operations, Session Host Operator handles drain mode and host removal, while User Session Operator is scoped down to messaging, disconnecting, and logging off sessions, exactly what a helpdesk tier needs and nothing more. Here's a gap that surprises new administrators. Desktop Virtualization Contributor lets you manage host pools, application groups, and workspaces, but it never lets you assign users or groups to them. To do that, you also need the User Access Administrator role. This is a deliberate least privilege boundary. The team that builds the infrastructure isn't automatically the team that decides who gets access to it. Nearly every role we've covered is a control plane role, managing the resource objects themselves. Desktop Virtualization User is different. It's a data plane role granting only the use application's permission, scoped to a specific application group. This is the assignment that actually determines what shows up in an end user's feed. Get the scope wrong, and users pass authentication perfectly but see nothing to connect to. Every AVD connection can authenticate twice, once to the service, and once to the session host if single sign-on is enabled. The Azure Virtual Desktop app governs the first phase, subscription, feed refresh, and the gateway connection. The Windows Cloud Login app governs the second phase, the session host sign-in itself. A conditional access policy that only targets the Azure Virtual Desktop app leaves that second phase completely unprotected once SSO is turned on. There's a third app in the picker that trips people up, the Azure Virtual Desktop Azure Resource Manager Provider app. It exists purely to retrieve a user's resource feed in the background, and Microsoft is explicit that it should never require multi-factor authentication. If you accidentally include it in an MFA enforcing policy, feed discovery breaks for your users, often with no obvious error pointing back to the cause. Sign-in frequency doesn't behave identically across the two apps. On the Azure Virtual Desktop app, once the period expires, feed refresh and diagnostics just quietly fail in the background until the user's next interactive sign-in. On the Windows Cloud Login app, re-authentication is enforced right at the session host sign-in, and it's the only app that supports the every-time option, which reprompts users roughly every 5 to 10 minutes after their last authentication for very tight control. There's one more documented gotcha specific to Microsoft Entra join session hosts. For connections to succeed, you either need to disable the legacy per-user multi-factor authentication sign-in method, or, if you want to preserve strong methods like Windows Hello for Business, exclude the Azure Windows VM sign-in app from your conditional access policy. Missing this step is a frequent cause of tickets where MFA works everywhere except on Entra-joined AVD hosts specifically. A solid access design layers all of this rather than merging it. Role-based access control handles admins and helpdesk at the control plane. Desktop Virtualization User assignments, scoped per application group, handle what end users can actually see and use. And a matched pair of conditional access policies, on both AVD apps, with the ARM provider app deliberately excluded, governs authentication for everyone regardless of role. Lesson 3 picks up from here and hardens the session host itself, once a user is actually connected to it.